He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Is a student loan relationship property? Why can't the government force companies to charge us less? And can you get New Zealand super if you don't qualify for an Aussie pension? That's some of what we're talking about on this week's episode of No Stupid Questions. I'm Susan Edmonds, I'm RNZ's money correspondent. I'm joined today by Justin Gregory, who will be asking all your money questions. Just a reminder to please keep them coming in. We've had a good mix lately.
Yep, a lovely mix lately. And thanks very much to Mary Argue for sitting in for me last week. I'm back and I'm ready to have another go. Thanks very much. Let's get into it. Our first question is from Taylor, who says the government doesn't want to hand out money to citizens to help them afford petrol, as this results in inflation. But why does the consumer end of the process have to be targeted, asked Taylor. Why can't the government cause a similar decrease in cost to the consumer, but instead of handing out money, they make the big companies take less profit, asks Taylor, not me. This could work for groceries too and would not be inflationary. Many of these big companies have good books, even if some creative accounting makes them seem not so flush. And I hasten to add that again is also from Taylor, not from me and not from Radio New Zealand.
So basically, why don't we just force companies to charge us less, I guess?
Why don't we just force them?
Yeah. We saw something like this from New Zealand First the other day when they were talking about breaking up foodstuffs. And I remember hearing this sort of argument when inflation went nuts after COVID, and a few people said, why is it that households have to be hit with higher interest rate costs to get them to slow down spending when maybe the companies charging us higher prices are the ones who should be stopped?
Yeah, and I mean, it's an understandable question, isn't it? I mean, particularly everything we've gone through over the past few years.
It is, but I think some people probably are a bit uncomfortable with the idea of government getting too involved with setting prices too. I spoke to Shamabil Yaqub, who pointed out that we kind of do this already via the Commerce Commission when there's a monopoly. But when there's, at least in theory, a free market, it is a bit trickier to have the government deciding what is a fair price and what's not.
Are those businesses making excessive profits? And if they are, what is the mechanism that you might use as a government to control that? So sometimes we have industries that are not very competitive. They don't have natural competitors, and we have regulated profits. So there, the prices are, in fact, regulated by the government, in that case, usually by the Commerce Commission. But you can't just do it randomly. You can't go, you seem to be making a bit of money, I'll have some of that. That reduces trust in institutions, and it destabilizes the entire kind of foundation of how things work. So it's not so much that you can't do it, you have to do it in a rules-based way, a predictable way, in a way that works.
Okay, and I suppose it would have wider implications, would it, if we started delving into who's allowed to make what profit?
Well, we do, right? I mean, that's what the Commerce Act actually does. So our competition policy is essentially designed to ensure that there is enough tension in the market, that there is enough competition, that the profits that a business makes is not excessive. And what excessive looks like is, of course, quite subjective. And therein lies a lot of the problems. It's all about contextualizing that stuff. I think quite often these conversations happen on knee-jerk rather than on the evidence.
Yeah, I suppose. And I guess a lot of our price rises that we might see in the short term are probably driven by wider international factors rather than companies here deciding to make more money.
Yeah, costs versus profits, right?
Yeah.
And generally speaking, when cost pressures go up in a weak economy, businesses find it very difficult to raise margins. They tend to absorb some of the cost increase in margin contraction. Generally speaking, in industries where there is very little elasticity, that you've got to go, they can pass on those cost increases. So it tends to be quite different depending on which industry you're in. For example, I can't imagine many hospitality businesses could get away with raising prices at the moment. People would just go to them even less.
Now, on a similar theme, I guess, Tony wants to know why nothing has been done to compensate for or reduce road user charges when the price of diesel is so high. Crikey, our listeners are strident this week, aren't they? Tony points out that it's more than the price of petrol in lots of places.
Yes, this has been a major pain point lately. The government has said that it doesn't want to reduce fuel excise tax or road user charges this time around. You might remember during the last fuel price spike when, the Ukraine invasion happened, they were halved. But road user charges are paid separately to the price of diesel at the pump because some diesel is used in situations where the vehicle doesn't ever go on the road, like, farm equipment, that sort of thing. Whereas fuel excise tax is just part of what you pay when you're filling up your car. And that's probably why those road user charges feel so tough at the moment because you're filling up your car, it's really expensive, and then you're paying a separate bill. But our colleagues in the gallery asked Finance Minister Nicola Willis about this, and she said it would help people on higher incomes and higher fuel users if we cut the road user charges more than it would help lower income people, and the government wants to target its fuel support more effectively. So as we know, it's giving an extra $50 to people who get the in-work tax credit. And she says it could also get in the way of any messaging about a need to reduce use if we move into the next stages of the fuel crisis.
You know, I was talking to a farmer yesterday who told me that the cost of diesel for ploughing his field has gone up from just over $3,000 to just over $9,000 in the last few weeks. Is that roughly equivalent to how much fuel prices have risen?
That's pretty rough. And also, I mean, think about what that means for our food prices into the future, especially with our latest inflation data already coming in higher than some people were expecting. I'm quite worried about it. But in terms of fuel prices, I see that Gatsby says the average 91 price now is $3.35 a litre and diesel is $3.62. I think those have both sort of plateaued lately, although plateaued at a high level.
Changing direction completely, we've got a question here from a woman who does not want to be named. She says, if, when you're married with kids, say one person pays off their student loan debt due to working more years and hours, while the other person was the day-to-day caregiver of the children and as a result reduced their work years and hours and so didn't fully pay off their student loan debt while the couple were together, then what happens if they separate and what should happen to the remaining student loan debt? Both people acquired the debt the same year they entered the relationship. She says she is in a situation where her ex is refusing to allow her student loan debt to be included in relationship property in the divorce settlement, and it seems incredibly unfair.
Yes, relationship breakups are so tricky when it comes to deciding how to compensate someone for time they spend out of the workforce looking after kids. A lot of people wouldn't be able to do the work they do if they didn't have someone at home making sure the kids are picked up and fed and all that stuff. I asked Jeremy Sutton about this, who is a lawyer who specialises in these issues. He says if the debt was incurred before the relationship, it's usually separate and not relationship debt. To be relationship debt, they need to be incurred jointly or by one person for the benefit of both. And so in the past, I've seen that could be things like borrowing to pay for living costs while studying, that sort of thing. He says if the debts are both incurred in the relationship, then there needs to be consistency in the way they're dealt with, which is quite a lawyery thing to say. Another expert in this area who I spoke to, Vanessa McGoldrick, says you need to focus on the benefit that the partner got during the relationship from paying down their student debt from relationship property income, rather than what your debt was or is. So the other party's benefit, which is any money that's paid off from the student debt during the relationship, is what raises a claim for compensation, she says. So income earned during a relationship is usually relationship property. She says the law allows the court to order things like increasing the share of relationship property for the partner who didn't get that benefit, so that benefit is the paying off the loan, and or it could require a sum of money to be paid as compensation. But I would get legal advice here, and that's me, not Vanessa speaking. I think this is all very messy, and as the person who wrote in says, it can feel really unfair and you want to make sure that you get it sorted now, I'd say.
Okay, and next up is a question from Frank, who says he's wanting to plan his retirement early. I'm right there with you, Frank. He says he and his wife work full-time in New Zealand and expect to have done so for 35 years by the time they are 65. Frank says he's started wondering about moving to Australia. That's a big club. He owns his own home here in New Zealand. He also has an investment property and is planning to buy a flat in Australia in the coming years as an investment or somewhere to live. He says he thinks he'd probably exceed the Australian asset test for its pension, so he wants to know if he goes to Australia after he's 65 and does not qualify for their pension, can he get New Zealand super instead?
No.
And on to the next question. Thanks, Susan.
I answered a similar question in my written column last week from someone who wanted to know if they could go to Australia and get the pension there. And the answer is that you can use your time spent in New Zealand to meet the Australian residency test, but you still need to meet the other criteria like being 67 and under the asset limits. And if you're there and you don't qualify for their system, then you're pretty much out of luck.
Another in the same vein, Michael. Michael asks, my partner and I are in our mid-50s and have been in Australia for the last year. I've read somewhere that for us to come home and retire, we have to be back by the time we are 60 or it may affect our New Zealand pension. Is this right, please? I'm guessing no?
No, not really. To access New Zealand Super, you have to have lived in New Zealand for a set period of time, which is increasing from 10 to 20 years, including 5 after 50, which I think is what he's getting at. But generally, as I just said, you can use time spent living in Australia or New Zealand to meet the residency requirement in either country, so it should be fine.
All right, so people wanting to move either way across the Tasman in retirement is one of the main themes of our inbox lately. But another is what's going on with KiwiSaver funds.
Yeah, it's been an unsettling time for some people as the, frankly, wild geopolitical situation has caused movements on markets. But to be fair, most markets have been doing a lot better than you might expect. I see the S&P 500's up very strongly just recently, and KiwiSaver balances in general haven't moved a huge amount. So when I've been speaking to people in the industry, they've repeated that same advice we often hear. If you're in the right type of fund for your risk profile, you should try not to look at what the markets are doing too much and just keep your head down, stick with it. And if you've realised you're in the wrong type of fund, you probably need to make a change, even if it's not an ideal time. And if you're not sure, get some advice.
Right, I saw, Susan, that you wrote about some big name fund managers not getting the highest returns lately.
Yes, some active managers have had a tough year or 3, perhaps. So active managers are managers who try to beat the market. They give you a better return, in theory, through picking investments. And they're different from passive managers who are generally just trying to track an index. I think people often like the idea of active management in volatile times because it's nice to think that there's someone sitting in an office somewhere keeping an eye on your investments and not just leaving you to the whims of the market. But the recent experience has shown that that hasn't always been the case and they haven't had the best outcomes. Returns have been about half that of passive funds in some cases.
Well, that seems a bit rubbish. Why is that?
Some people think it's just hard for managers to beat the market consistently anyway, but there are other things going on at the moment too. We've seen huge growth in a relatively small number of companies' share price. So if you were less invested in those, you would have missed out. But then I guess the other side is if they had fallen sharply in price and you'd been less invested, you would have benefited. And the political situation has also been quite difficult because it's been so unpredictable and sort of, governed by tweet. And some of the managers suggested that it's actually fairer to look at their performance over a longer time period anyway. But yeah, upshot, difficult times for active managers.
Yeah, I was talking to a mortgage broker I know this morning who said this is all just very annoying.
Yes.
He could have used other words, but I thought annoying was actually pretty damn on the money.
I think that's accurate. A long period of unprecedented times. I would like some precedented ones.
All right, last week you and Mary, Susan, asked which KiwiSaver fund performed the best over the 12 months of 2025, and the answer is please.
The answer is Colonel's Clean Energy Fund, which was up almost 60%.
60%? And that's a global clean energy fund.
That's right. It's a passively invested one also, as per our previous conversation.
All right, we're going to keep a bit of an eye on that because that is really interesting. A clean energy fund up 60% in a year. Anyway, now this week we want to know which company you think was the best performer on the New Zealand Stock Exchange.
Send your answers as well as any questions you have to questions@rnz.co.nz. No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmonds was written and presented by Susan Edmonds. That's me. Justin Gregory is the producer. The engineer is Phil Benj. Thanks to Taylor, Tony, Frank and Michael for their questions, and Shamabil Yakub, Jeremy Sutton and Vanessa McGoldrick for their answers. Follow and listen to No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmonds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or any podcast app so you don't miss an episode. Stay safe, everyone.